You know, the story of Adam in paradise, it's one of those stories we all think we know. But what if the entire common understanding of the fall from grace is actually based on a deep misunderstanding of a single divine command? Well, today we are going to dive deep into a really detailed commentary on Surah Al-Aʿrāf by Ayatollah Javadi Amoli to unpack the incredibly intricate theological and linguistic layers of this absolutely profound narrative.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to set the stage by looking at Adam's initial state in paradise and the one command he was given. Then, we'll dig into the forbidden tree itself and, really, how Satan's temptation actually worked. After that, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the Quran's specific language about the deception, tackle some of the big theological questions that pop up, and finally, this is the big payoff. We'll see how one crucial distinction completely reframes the entire story.
Okay, let's start where the story begins, in a state of paradise. It's so important to get this setting right because it establishes this environment of incredible abundance and total freedom that Adam and his wife were living in, a freedom that was defined by just one single critical prohibition.
This verse right here, this is our anchor for everything. The divine message is crystal clear, right? Dwell, eat from wherever you will. It's a world of boundless permission, just total freedom. But then, right in the middle of all that freedom, one boundary is drawn. Do not approach this tree. And the consequence is laid out just as plainly, lest you be among the wrongdoers. As you're about to see, the entire narrative pivots on how we interpret that one command.
And let's get specific, because the Arabic here is absolutely key. The phrase is, "La taqraba hadhihi ash-shajara." And notice, the prohibition isn't just don't eat from it, it's don't even get close to it. It's like a protective barrier, a safety zone. And this is exactly where the commentary tells us our focus needs to be, because if we don't understand the tree, we're not going to understand the story. It's that simple. So the big question, right? If this tree is the absolute focal point, what was it? Are we talking about a literal tree with apples and leaves, or is it something symbolic? And just as important, how is the temptation actually delivered? Let's deconstruct the symbolism of the tree and the very subtle way Satan's temptation worked. The identity of the Shajara Mamnu'a, the forbidden tree, has been a subject of really deep thought for centuries. And what's so fascinating about the commentary we're looking at is how it pushes us to think beyond a simple, literal reading. The physical form of the tree is way less important than what it actually represents.
Okay, so let's look at the options. The source material lays out a few interpretations. First, some say it was a physical plant, maybe wheat. It's plausible, but the commentary suggests that's kind of missing the deeper point. Then there's the idea of the tree of knowledge, but this one gets shot down pretty hard and for a really good reason. Knowledge is a virtue from God. Why would God ever forbid knowledge? So that leaves us with the most profound interpretation, the tree of envy. And we're not talking about petty jealousy here. This is a deep, spiritual longing for a status or a rank that you see in someone else, but that you haven't yet attained yourself.
And this is where it gets really, really deep. The commentary brings in a narration from Imam al-Sadiq that just nails it down. It says that this envy wasn't worldly, it was spiritual. Adam, from his incredibly high station, was able to see the even higher spiritual rank of the Prophet Muhammad and his family, and he felt this pull, this longing to achieve that level. That feeling, that internal state of desire, that was the forbidden tree. It wasn't something outside of him, it was a state of being inside of him.
So we know the what. The tree was a state of envy. But now for the how. How exactly did Satan tempt Adam? Well, the Quran uses this very precise term, waswasa. Now, this is not a normal conversation. It's not an external voice. Think of it more like a subtle, hidden internal suggestion. It's that sneaky thought that just pops into your head and plants a seed of doubt or desire. It's a quiet psychological mechanism.
Satan's strategy was, in a twisted way, absolutely brilliant. He didn't just say, hey, go near that tree. No, he sold them a dream. He whispered that this tree was the key to two things they desired, immortality and becoming like angels. That was the lure. But his real goal? It was to strip them of their spiritual covering and expose their physical vulnerabilities, their earthly nature, what the Quran calls their sawatihama. And he did all of this using that subtle internal whisper, the waswasa, that preys on the longing that was already there.
So we have this internal whisper, this waswasa. The crucial question is, how did that translate into an actual action? How did the temptation succeed?
This is where we have to get into the linguistic details of the Quran's account, because the specific words used tell us so much about the sophisticated process of deception and its immediate transformative consequences.
I mean, this verse is just a masterclass in deception. Satan pulls out the ultimate tool. He doesn't just make a promise, he presents himself as a sincere advisor. He frames his temptation as a helpful tip, a secret just for their benefit. And then, to seal the deal, he swears an oath to them. The commentary really stresses how powerful this is. By swearing an oath, he created this facade of absolute trustworthiness, preying on their innocence.
Okay, now check this out, because this is where the linguistic analysis is just mind-blowing. The source commentary points out this incredible nuance. In another chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, the word used for this event is fa'azalahuma, which means he caused them to slip. It suggests a quick, sudden mistake. But here, in Surah Al-Aʿrāf, the word is fadallahuma. And the root of that word, it means to lower a bucket slowly and deliberately into a well. Do you see the profound difference? This wasn't a sudden slip-up. It was a slow, patient, methodical deception. Satan didn't push them. He slowly lowered them by a rope of deceit.
So what happened the moment they tasted from the tree? It wasn't a lightning bolt from the sky. The change was completely internal. The Quran says their so'atihima, their physical nature, suddenly became apparent to them, and their very first reflexive instinct was to start covering themselves with leaves. Now, this isn't just about physical nakedness. This was the dawn of a totally new kind of self-consciousness, a sense of shame and vulnerability that simply did not exist in their previous state of pure spiritual innocence.
And the dialogue that follows this is so profoundly important. God calls out to them, and it's less of an accusation and more of a reminder. It's like he's saying, didn't I give you two clear pieces of guidance? First, stay away from that tree, and second, I told you that Satan is an obvious enemy. And their response is immediate. No excuses, no finger-pointing. Just, Rabbana zalamna anfusana. Our Lord, we have wronged ourselves. They take full responsibility for the harm they brought upon their own state.
Now, a story this dense and this important naturally brings up some really challenging theological questions. Like, how did eating a piece of fruit physically change them? And maybe more importantly, how can a prophet who is meant to be infallible say we've wronged ourselves? This seems like a major contradiction, right? Well, the source commentary anticipates these complexities and addresses them head-on.
So let's start with that first question, the physiological one, which has really deep spiritual implications. What was the actual mechanism that caused this sudden awareness of their physical bodies? Was it some kind of magic, or was there a more natural, even if it was a heavenly, process going on?
The commentary gives this fascinating explanation. It suggests that the food in that specific state of paradise was of a totally different nature. It was like pure energy. It was absorbed and nourished them without creating any physical waste or byproducts. It was purely spiritual sustenance. The forbidden fruit, though, was different. It had an earthly quality, so when they consumed it, it was like it flipped a switch in their bodies, activating a mortal digestive system for the very first time. And it was that shift from a celestial metabolism to a terrestrial one that suddenly made their physical nature, their sawatima, so apparent to them.
Okay, this brings us to the absolute core theological dilemma. The doctrine of isma, prophetic infallibility, is essential belief. It holds that prophets are protected from sin. But then we have the prophet Adam himself explicitly stating, we have wronged ourselves. So how can both of these things be true? This is the central problem that this entire exegetical analysis is trying to solve. And the answer, according to the commentary, lies in understanding the nature of the wrongdoing. The zulm, the wrong, wasn't against God in the sense of breaking a law. It was directed against themselves. They said anfusana, ourselves. They lowered their own spiritual station. It was like ignoring your doctor's perfect advice. You haven't broken a state law, but you've definitely harmed your own body. It was a lapse in judgment that brought personal consequences, not a legal transgression that constitutes a sin. So you can see how all these pieces are starting to fit together, right? The nature of the tree, the mechanism of temptation, the meaning of wrongdoing, it all builds toward one final, crucial distinction. And this is the key that unlocks the entire narrative and resolves that massive contradiction we were just talking about.
And this is the solution, brilliantly illustrated. The source text explains that in Islamic theology, divine commands, or amr, come in two types.
First, there's Amr Madawi. This is a legislative command. Think of it like a capital L law from a ruler to a subject. If you break it, it's a sin, a masiyat. But then there's the second type, Amr Irshadi. This is a guiding or advisory command. The best analogy is a compassionate doctor telling their patient, for your health, do not eat this. If the patient ignores the advice and eats it, have they committed a crime? No. But have they caused harm to themselves? Absolutely.
So the crucial point is this: the prohibition given to Adam in paradise, do not approach this tree, was an Amr Irshadi. It was divine advice for his own well-being, to help him preserve his high spiritual state. So by ignoring that perfect guidance, he didn't commit a legal sin against God's law. He acted against his own best interest and suffered the natural consequence, which was losing that paradisal state. And with that understanding, the doctrine of prophetic infallibility remains completely protected.
This whole detailed analysis leaves us with a really profound final thought to chew on. If we start to see divine guidance not just as a set of strict laws to be obeyed or else, but also as perfect, compassionate advice for our own flourishing, like the advice from a wise doctor, how does that completely transform our approach to faith, to obedience, and to our own personal spiritual journey? It shifts the entire focus from a fear of transgression to a proactive desire for our own well-being, guided by an ultimate and loving wisdom.